This is the farmhouse where I grew up, where my father grew up, where my grandfather grew up, where my great-grandfather grew up. The main house was built in 1860. We got electricity in 1943 with the Rural Electrification Act. And now what I am doing is I'm removing the majority of the 1960 updates and reverting the era back to somewhere between 1920 and 1950. I'm going to show you each room in the order that I did them years ago. While I am no more of a carpenter or a designer than any member of my family has ever been, I'm doing it to suit me and my tastes. We've got to drop back to book one of the kitchen on this farmhouse renovation. Somehow we missed one of our big updates, and that was the old sideboard that we bought down at Madison Bouteville, and we redid it, and you've seen it in the background of other videos, but for some reason it just got overlooked. So I'm going to show you now how we did it. And you notice it's just an old gray beadboard bottom, but we believe that it was a top for something. Not sure what, but here's how we renovated it. So here's a picture of the back of the what we're calling the sideboard. It's got the original boards, and you can notice that there is some water damage on the bottom because when we found it, it was setting outside on the grass, and it probably had been there for a while. So what we decided to do was put a piece of Luan plywood glued and nailed to the back so that it would be a nice smooth surface, just like we did for the red kitchen cupboard. And then tipping it upside down, we proceeded to seal the bottom with some MH Ready Patch and some caulk so that the bottom was rodent tight. Now here's a close-up picture of the side, and you can see that it was gray, then it was blue, then it was brown, then it was kind of a light brown. So it's had a long life with paint. Now here you can see that we've got the doors off, but there is a major problem with the doors. The wood, the individual boards dried out and shrunk. And if you see here, if you notice the tongue and groove, it has separated and pulled away. So what we did was we unscrewed the supports, put clamps, and pulled the door together. And with that pulled together, you can see how the tongue and groove is now nice and tight. And this image right here, this shows where the original boards were. You can see that we pulled it in over 3/8 of an inch on just the one door. So with the other door, you're looking at 6/8, that's 3/4 of an inch. So that meant when we put the doors back on, that the center stile was now 3/4 of an inch too narrow and you had a gap. So fix that. You remove the center stile, and it was nailed into the top and bottom and each shelf. Then you go ahead and put a new wider stile in, and you can see here I'm shimming the doors and squaring up the stile that is 3/4 of an inch wider and checking the clearance on the other door, and then I proceeded to glue and nail it back into place. That problem was solved. So because this sideboard did not have a base, we're going to do exactly what we did in chapter 5 for the cupboard baseboard. We take 2x4 and build a box, and then I skinned it with hobby wood, just like I did back in chapter 5. And here is the final image of the base completed. With construction done, then I proceeded to prime and paint the sideboard. And here's the colors that we chose for the interior, and we're going to have white on the exterior. And this next image is of the doors that are fully painted and ready to go. And this gives you a look at the back with the Luan that I didn't have a picture of earlier, so that it cleans up the back quite nicely. Then I cleaned up the hardware that were all original and period and mounted the doors, and here you can see me, I'm putting the door latches on. And then for a top, I'm doing exactly the same thing that I did with the cupboard sideboard in Chapter 5, because this was actually done before Chapter 5, but it just never got filmed, like I said earlier. So we used the edge glued pine and then banded it, and eventually we went ahead and finished it, again identical to Chapter 5. And this is what it looked like when it was up on the work stand, and it looks considerably better than it did when it first was dragged into the kitchen. And here it is down on the floor. You can see it's got quite a nice finish. And then when we put it in front of the picture window, which was where we wanted it to go, we put in some kitchen appliances that we don't use that often. And that is how we rebuilt our original sideboard. Oh, and as a side note, you can notice that it's around Christmas time because the sad little Christmas cactus there is flowering.